In the early 1920s, among the top 5% of professions available to women, one job stood out as a prestigious opportunity for impoverished young women: dial painting. Equipped with a watch dial, a cup of water, a fine-tipped brush, and a vial emitting a mysterious greenish-blue glow in the dark, these young women meticulously performed their tasks. They would dip the brush into water, then into the luminous paint, and delicately shape the brush tip with their lips, a technique known as lip pointing. This process was repeated throughout their workday, dipping, lip pointing, and painting over and over again. Unbeknownst to them, within a few years, dozens of these vibrant young women would begin to suffer from horrific ailments beyond imagination. Their teeth would loosen and fall out with the slightest touch. Their jaws would deteriorate, leading to a condition now known as radium jaw. Even after being laid to rest, their decomposed skeletons would continue to emit an eerie blue-green glow for up to 1,600 years. The world, gripped by fear, came to know them as the Radium Girls. A beautiful 15-year-old girl walked gracefully through the factory, where she had just been hired as a watch dial painter. Her new job was simple, yet fascinating, but what made this paint truly remarkable was that it contained radium, a radioactive element discovered by Marie Curie, using a special luminous paint to make watch hands glow in the dark. People even believed radium could cure all diseases. It sounded like pure magic. Our innocent young 15-year-old girl was enchanted by this miraculous substance. She would sometimes paint her lips with it, brush her teeth, and even apply it to her nails, marveling at how her entire body sparkled in the dark. When these girls walked home at night, they glowed like celestial beings, radiating an otherworldly aura. But life is never that simple. The beautiful young girl soon began to suffer from unbearable migraines and an agonizing toothache. Then, one fateful night, she felt something deeply wrong. She gently tugged on a loose tooth, and it fell out effortlessly. Then another and another. Within a week, nearly all her teeth had fallen out. Her face began to peel, her jawbone became riddled with holes, and within 2 weeks, our once beautiful girl was dead. Welcome to America's worst nightmare, the Radium Girls tragedy. Discovered in 1898 by Nobel Prize-winning scientist Marie Curie, radium was quickly introduced as a groundbreaking cancer treatment. Due to its early success, radium was hailed as a miracle drug, believed to possess extraordinary healing powers. Humanity became mesmerized by its potential. This era witnessed what can only be described as a radium craze, where radioactive materials were marketed as health-boosting elixirs, finding their way into everyday consumer products, from toothpaste and cosmetics to food and beverages. One of the most reckless manufacturers even infused small amounts of radium into drinking water, branding it as a miraculous elixir that could cure everything from impotence and asthma to countless other ailments. Ignorance is not a crime, but the deaths of thousands due to the greed and negligence of a few remain an unforgivable tragedy. One of the most infamous victims of radium poisoning was Eben Byers. Does this image look familiar? You've probably seen it countless times on YouTube. Allow me to introduce you to Eben Byers, millionaire, socialite, champion golfer, radium enthusiast, and ultimately, a tragic victim. Byers fell for the hype, believing every advertisement about radium's supposed health benefits. Over time, he consumed an astonishing 1,400 bottles of radium-infused water, leading to catastrophic cellular and bone damage, slowly rotting his body from within. By the time of his agonizing death, his entire lower jaw and chin had disintegrated, decayed by severe radium poisoning. The 51-year-old man was left with only 2 teeth as protruding from a fragment of bone beneath his nose. His skull had begun to develop large holes, exposing the delicate structures inside. Have you ever heard of Marie Curie's personal notebooks? They are considered one of science's most cursed artifacts, so radioactive that they will remain dangerous for another 1,600 years. In 1934, Marie Curie succumbed to aplastic anemia, a fatal condition caused by prolonged exposure to radium and polonium. She never suspected that her experiments were harmful, and as a result, contaminated not only herself, but her entire household. She often carried radium and polonium samples in the pockets of her lab coat, bringing them home to study in her free time. This unknowing habit left her clothes, books, cookbooks, jewelry, furniture, and countless household items contaminated with lethal radiation. It was later determined that Curie's notebooks were highly contaminated with radium-226, one of the most dangerously radioactive isotopes known to science. At the time, scientific understanding was still extremely limited. Now, let's return to the young women working in our dial painting factories. They genuinely believed that radium was good for their health. In Europe, radium was used as a glowing wall paint for children's rooms. In Switzerland, artists used radium-infused paint to create luminous masterpieces. People who worked with it were easily recognizable, even in the darkest of nights. Countless everyday objects were coated in this magical paint, from signboards and theater seat numbers to fishing lures and doll eyes. If something needed to glow, then it had to be painted with radium. With such widespread enthusiasm, the United States Radium Corporation was founded in New York City in 1914. They developed a new luminous paint called undark, made possible by radium. The demand for this paint skyrocketed as World War I loomed on the horizon. For soldiers hiding in dark trenches, being able to check their watches could mean the difference between life and death. Even the faintest light source could reveal their location to the enemy, making them an easy target. Around the same time, another radium-focused company emerged, but with a more civilian-oriented mission: the Radium Dial Company. By the 1920s, this company had hired over 1,000 young women, producing around 4,300 glowing watch dials every single day. They preferred younger girls, believing that smaller, more delicate hands were better suited for the precise work of painting watch dials. Some of these girls were as young as 11 years old when they started working. It was an enticing job, light, easy, and well paid. Many young women even encouraged their family members to join, painting tiny watch hands side by side. The girls were meticulously trained to shape their paintbrush tips using their lips, a technique explicitly encouraged by the factory, which assured them that it was completely safe. Through this seemingly innocent process, radium slowly seeped into their bodies, bit by bit. The radium girls genuinely believed that they were becoming healthier, convinced that working with this miracle substance was a privilege. After all, radium was the most expensive material in the world at the time, worth the equivalent of $2.2 million per gram in today's value. The girls were celebrated as artists, praised for creating the world's most exquisite glowing watches. Little did they know, this prestigious job would soon become their death sentence. But the golden days didn't last long. In 1922, the first victim emerged. Molly Maggia, a 22-year-old factory worker, was forced to leave her job due to illness. It all started with a toothache. After her first tooth was extracted, the next one began to ache, and soon it too had to be pulled. From the empty sockets where her teeth once were, grotesque, darkened tumors began to form and grow, swollen lumps filled with blood and pus, resembling dark, decayed flowers. These malignant growths spread rapidly, giving Molly a foul-smelling breath and causing her excruciating pain. Soon, her legs gave out, leaving her unable to walk. By May 1922, her condition had spiraled into a nightmare. She had lost most of her teeth, and the infection had spread beyond her jaw, affecting her palate and even her hands. But the worst was yet to come. When a dentist gently tapped on her jawbone, he recoiled in horror. The bone crumbled instantly in his hands. Yes, crumbled, literally disintegrating into dust. He barely had to apply any force. He simply reached into her mouth and picked out loose fragments of bone. Days later, Molly's entire lower jaw detached and fell out in the same horrifying way. On September 12, 1922, Molly succumbed to massive internal bleeding at the age of 24. Do you know what's the most horrifying part? Her death certificate listed the cause of death as syphilis. After Molly Maggia's death, the nightmare only worsened. More and more radium girls began to suffer horrific symptoms. Some developed spinal collapse, others suffered from skin cancer, their eyes swelled abnormally, and their bodies slowly deteriorated from prolonged radium exposure. Just imagine, for hundreds of workdays, they licked their paintbrushes and ingested radium hundreds of times daily. But do you know what's even more terrifying? Every single death certificate of the Radium girls falsely stated that they had died from syphilis. The company outright denied any responsibility, sparking outrage among the victims and their families. Legal battles ensued, and the horrific story of the Radium girls spread worldwide through newspapers and media. It wasn't until 1925, when a doctor named Harrison Martland stepped in, that the truth was finally uncovered. He exhumed the body of Molly Maggia and conducted investigations on other victims, finally proving that it was radium poisoning that had killed them. But in the world of capitalism, money dictates everything. It took 3 more years until 1928 for the final lawsuit to be won, marking a milestone in workers' rights. Only then was the true danger of radium fully acknowledged. The practice of lip-pointing brushes was banned, and protective gear was finally introduced for workers handling luminous paint. But, tragically, the story didn't end there. It wasn't until 1939, nearly 2 decades later, that the surviving victims finally received compensation. Death certificates were revised, properly documenting the true cause of death. By 1968, radium-based luminous paint was completely phased out and was no longer used in watchmaking. With a half-life of 1,600 years, once radium enters the human body, it never leaves. Can you believe it? Even today, Marie Curie's notebooks and Molly Maggia's remains are kept under extreme security in museums and buried deep underground. And yet, they continue to glow with an eerie, ghostly light, still radioactive, still decaying, still deadly, a terrifying legacy.